Let's start in Columbia, South Carolina. Auburn minus 3.5 at South Carolina. What do you think about this? I've heard from a lot of you this week, and a lot of you have been on very different sides of the fence here. I'm going to tell you which side of the fence I'm on in a second. South Carolina has been pretty good on third down defensively. I know there have been a lot of areas we can nitpick this team. It's not even nitpicking, it's just legitimate criticism. But they've been pretty good on third down. And the reason that matters in every game, but particularly this game, is Auburn has yet to really find themselves in terms of identity offensively. They have not been good at all in game control type metrics, even against what you would call inferior teams to them. And when they have faced equal or superior teams like Georgia, they just totally get drowned. So Auburn has shown no ability to really control a game this year. And if you get them off the field on third down, if South Carolina is able to, in other words, do what they have so far this year on third down, I think it could be a problem. And if it's a problem early, given the way that they had to play last week and scratch and claw and fight to the very end last week while Carolina cruised in Nashville, I think it could set up really for a second half where finally Colin Hill and this offense get things going. And they haven't been terrible now. Haven't been just because you lose. They lost against Florida. They didn't look terrible against Florida. I think Will Muschamp's defense has a lot better chance to have consistent success Saturday against Auburn than they did, let's say, against Florida. I don't use the Vanderbilt game a lot. I'm going to pick South Carolina to win against Auburn. Has really little to do with the Vanderbilt game last week. I think generally they've been trending in this direction, period. So this is Muschamp's shot. They're a slight underdog. They're a 3.5 point underdog. I'm going to take Carolina plus the points. I'm going to take Carolina to win outright. Another underrated game in the SEC this week is Kentucky at Tennessee. Be careful with your perception here. Obviously, Tennessee's coming off a pretty convincing loss at Georgia, whereas Kentucky just virtually shut out Mike Leach and company. I think they had like 6 turnovers in that game on the plus side for Kentucky. I think the matchup benefits Tennessee, though. I'm going to tell you why. I don't think it's all that difficult to figure out. There is no passing game to speak of with Kentucky, whereas Tennessee, this is not a team, unless you possess just overwhelming physical traits like Georgia, for example. This is not a team that you're going to be able to be one dimensional against offensively and have very much success. While their talent level on defense at Tennessee may not be A plus, I think they are plenty disciplined enough to limit a team like Kentucky. What would hurt Tennessee here and what would turn this game sideways is a bunch of turnovers. And you would expect sloppy play if you were to look in the preseason at this schedule spot. You look at the fact that you just played Georgia and you got Alabama on deck. So you look at this as that little sandwich opportunity for Kentucky to sneak in here and get a win. I don't really look at it that way. Just the way that the ball is bounced, I don't think any focus is on anything other than Kentucky right now. There's been a massive amount of criticism on that Tennessee run game and that offensive line. And I think this is a very good week for them to atone for that. I don't view this at all as Tennessee running away with this game. Quite the opposite. I think it takes 4 quarters to do it. But eventually, I think not only does Tennessee win this game, I think they find a way to cover it. Probably not the most aesthetically pleasing game on the slate on Saturday, but I like Tennessee to win. I like Tennessee to cover. How about Texas A&M? Yet another underrated game on the SEC slate Saturday. It's not all about Georgia Bama Saturday. There's a lot on the undercard that I think's really entertaining. It got a lot of different angles here. A&M is a 5.5 point favorite at Mississippi State. So I know what you're thinking. Anyone who knows anything about betting culture, anyone who's just watched college football for quite a while, you know how a point spread can play tricks on your mind, right? If I were to have taken Texas A&M and they opened as a 14 point favorite, you would actually be less concerned because you would say, okay, well, the odds makers think they're going to win big. So at least if they win by a touchdown, even, they won't have covered, but they'll still win. But now it's down at 5.5. And so you think to yourself, oh, this has got to be a sucker bet. They just beat Florida. Mississippi State's looked horrible since week 1. And yet it's only 5.5. Something must be up. Maybe something is up, or maybe that's just what the line should be. Maybe there's not a whole lot of knee jerk. Maybe an odds maker doesn't think anything differently about A&M now than they did this time last week. We haven't changed our opinion on A&M all that much, but we expected them to compete with and possibly beat Florida last week. We expected Mississippi State to lose to Kentucky last week. We were on both of those games. So this is not a surprise to us. But now Mississippi State is sitting there, and it's one of those do down, do up situations. So like that in betting culture, that matters too. But what does Mike Leach's offense do now? Because it's been 2 weeks in a row that not exactly the most premier brands in the SEC have largely shut them down. So what do they do? What's the plan B? Does he have another card, he being Mike Leach, to pull out of his back pocket? Mike Elko's defense has been both victimized at times this year in A&M, and he's also shined at times this year at A&M. They're vulnerable on the back end. They can get burned on the back end. I think a lot of folks who maybe lean Mississippi State here think to themselves, okay, I remember week one. I remember how my lasting impression of that game is Mississippi State receivers running free, past and in that LSU secondary. And I remember Alabama doing that. And I remember Florida doing that. So that's what Mississippi State's going to do Saturday. Well, those are also two-dimensional teams. Those are teams where you got, I mean, Jimbo Fisher's offense, for example, is a lot different. And Alabama's offense is a lot different. Florida's offense is a lot different than the way they run at Mississippi State. So I wouldn't necessarily just think that's going to be the case. Can they burn that secondary? Yeah, I guess they could. I'm going to tell you something. I got to differ with our model here. Our model leans Mississippi State, and I think it's just picking up on situational dynamics. Like historical data points would tell you, forget about which teams are playing. You don't bet on teams, you just bet on numbers. And the two sets of numbers here, or as you would call them, teams, would tell you based on historic data points, expect a close game and expect a possible upset. I don't. I don't at all, because I don't think that this matches the historical data points. So I'm going to take A&M to win, and I'm going to take them to cover. And I actually feel pretty confident about that. I do not have a lot of confidence in where Mississippi State is right now. The last one I wanted to hit on is Ole Miss as a 1.5-point favorite at Arkansas. I hate this spot for Ole Miss. I got to tell you, I really hate this spot. They are coming off of essentially a Super Bowl. And that's the way that they played. Bama played really late in the night. I think they drained the reservoir entirely there. And then conversely, you think about what Arkansas is coming off of. They're coming off of, for all intents and purposes, a win, except that's not what the record book says they did last week at Auburn. And so if you believe in the whole wounded animal mode deal that our buddy JC Sherbert talks about all the time, hey, that's where Arkansas is. And they're coming home and they got a game against Ole Miss. I don't know what in the world Ole Miss looks like coming into this game, but watch the start. Arkansas has not gotten off to the best starts in games. And if they get behind, like if Ole Miss does come in and they pop them for 14, 17 points early, Arkansas got down 17-zip early last week and came back and nearly won the game against Auburn. But you're also able to slow Auburn down scoring. I don't know if that's going to be the case necessarily this week. I don't have a good feel for this game at all. I do, before I give you my pick, one thing that I am interested in. There's a lot of comparative analysis out there. How's Mike Leach going to fare versus how Lane Kiffin's going to fare in the state of Mississippi? Well, Mike Leach already faced Arkansas, and they pretty much shut him down. Well, now Arkansas faces Ole Miss. I tend to think Ole Miss is going to have more success. So I'm going to take Ole Miss to win. I'm going to take Ole Miss to cover. I don't have a lot of confidence in that pick. Let me just tell you.